Hello, I'm Mark Blunden and this is the Standards Tech and Science Daily podcast. Coming up, the 100,000 strong parent army fighting child smartphone addiction. But first, the world's IT infrastructure went into meltdown on Friday, described by experts as the worst digital chaos ever seen. Microsoft cloud-based systems were hit by blue error screens and service outages, hitting everything from bank payments to supermarkets, GP surgeries, stock exchanges, airlines, trains and television stations. The meltdown that sparked the chaos was understood to be linked to an update from the US cybersecurity company CrowdStrike that hobbled many Windows systems. Worldwide issues were reported illustrating the fragility of digital infrastructure, with Microsoft saying the outage hit users' ability to access various Microsoft 365 apps and services. Organisations raced to adapt with analogue workarounds, while airline passengers posted photographs of handwritten boarding passes. Next. The COVID-19 inquiry's bombshell report has found successive governments were totally unprepared for the devastation of the coronavirus pandemic, resulting in fatal strategic flaws.
In 2019, it was widely believed in the United Kingdom and abroad that the UK was not only properly prepared, but was one of the best prepared countries in the world to respond to a pandemic. This belief was dangerously mistaken. In reality, the UK was ill-prepared for dealing with the whole system civil emergency of a pandemic, let alone the coronavirus pandemic that actually struck.
That's COVID inquiry chairwoman Baroness Hallett, who made a series of recommendations for future pandemic preparedness. She said the UK was more vulnerable going into COVID due to health inequalities, high levels of obesity and respiratory illness, coupled with health and social care services strained to capacity.
I have no hesitation in concluding that the processes, planning and policy of the civil contingency structures across the United Kingdom failed the citizens of all four nations. There were serious errors on the part of the state and serious flaws in our civil emergency systems.
More than 235,000 people had died with COVID in the UK by the end of 2023, one of the worst death tolls in Europe.
One of the first lines of defence to a pandemic is containment, and this requires a system of test, trace and isolate that can be rapidly scaled up to meet the demands of a major outbreak. This did not exist in the United Kingdom when the COVID-19 pandemic struck.
The inquiry found London and the rest of the country were left vulnerable after ministers and officials planned for a massive flu outbreak, while over the past decade stockpiles of critical infection control items such as surgical masks and respirators had been reduced.
The UK prepared for the wrong pandemic. The significant risk of an influenza pandemic had long been considered, written about and planned for. However, that preparedness was inadequate for a global pandemic of the kind that struck. The institutions and structures responsible for emergency planning were labyrinthine in their complexity. There were fatal strategic flaws underpinning the assessment of the risks faced by the UK, how those risks and their consequences could be managed and prevented from worsening, and how the state should respond.
And Baroness Hallett gave this grim warning.
There will be a next time. The expert evidence suggests it's not a question of if another pandemic will strike, but when. The evidence is overwhelmingly to the effect that another pandemic, potentially one that is even more transmissible and lethal, is likely to occur in the near to medium future.
Brenda Doherty, on behalf of COVID-19 bereaved families for Justice UK, said in response that while the report marked a huge milestone, lessons must be learned to save future lives. Now, parents in a growing campaign movement are fighting back against the grip of smartphones and the numbing impact of doom scrolling on child well-being. Smartphone-free childhood is surging in popularity, with over 100,000 members in the UK who are often at the end of their tether due to the impact of devices on family life.
We now know through studies that they're actually really harmful for physical and mental health of children, but then also on a more social level for peer engagement or just family engagement in general. We need to ensure children are playing in having a childhood and not scrolling away on these devices that are just harmful to them and just wasting their time. They could be doing something much more meaningful.
That's Leah Henry, mother of two and South East London regional lead for Smartphone Free Childhood.
The problem is, even if you've decided not to give a smartphone to your child, their friends might have a smartphone and they might consume that content through their friends. And we've heard stories of parents finding out that their children have seen beheading videos online. And, this is something that when we were children, we would never even dream of ever. I had no idea this was a thing. But the thing is, children are becoming desensitized to it as well because it's becoming normal. So this is just simply not okay. I don't know how there could be an argument against that.
And Leah explains the impact on young minds.
Children are creative by nature, but then we see that by adulthood, we lose this for many reasons. But now we're seeing that children are losing that much earlier because they're just not using that creative muscle. They're spending time scrolling instead of playing imaginative play. And it's really sad because creativity is not just about, producing a picture, but it's actually about the thought process behind it, how you problem solve, how you lead, how you interact. It's a skill that is actually inherent in most things that you need in daily life.
Plus the benefits of ditching the doom scroll.
They're kind of regaining that childhood joy that they used to have. So it's just a really beautiful thing. It's almost like seeing their children re-emerge as, the lovely, wonderful kids that are hungry for life.
It follows a study by the University of Southern Denmark that found in just a fortnight, parents could see a significant improvement in child mental health behaviour by cutting screen time to 3 hours a week. Let's go to the ads. Coming up, astronaut describes emerging back into the world after over a year on Mars. Sort of. Why not hit follow? In the meantime, give us a rating. Welcome back. A planned $600 million NASA mission to explore the moon's dark side has been cancelled amid concerns about manufacturing and spiralling costs. The Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover Mission, or VIPER, would have seen a lunar rover trundling around the moon's south pole to collect samples on an ice hunting mission and had been due to launch by last Christmas. It comes after China was the first to collect samples from the same region last month, with the Chang'e 6 module scooping up around 2 kilograms of rocky deposits. And finally, a scientist has described the strange sensation of emerging from NASA's Mars simulation back into the world after 378 days. Canadian biologist Kelly Haston lived with 3 crew members in a 157 square metre habitat that was designed to simulate conditions of a future mission to the Red Planet. Haston told CBC Radio that emerging to camera flashes, applause and a lot of faces was joyful but understandably overwhelming. Activities during the Mars June Alpha experiments in a 3D printed environment at NASA in Houston included simulated Mars walks, growing vegetables and collating health data. If you're up to date, come back at 4 p.m. for the Standard Special Edition, A Week's a Long Time in Westminster, with our politics team, and we'll be back on Monday at 1 p.m. See you then.